The crane is one of the most enduring symbols of Oriental Asian culture. It has been immortalized in poems and paintings and songs as a symbol of beauty, love, grace, good fortune, and eternal life. It's therefore not very surprising that in a setting like Legend of the Five Rings, that a clan would take such a creature as its symbol. The Crane clan are the second most powerful family in all of the Emerald Empire, just behind the Imperial line itself. They are the curators of art and beauty, the masters of court etiquette, and politicians par excellence. And their story begins, as the stories of all the great clans begin, with the fall from heaven. 10 children were born to Onotangu, the Lord Moon, and Amaterasu, the Lady Sun, 8 sons and 2 daughters. One son died in Onotangu's belly before Hante could rescue them, and the other, Fu Leng, fell into hell and became evil. The other 8 fell to earth and eventually came to live among the mortal races, and among these was the Lady Doji. Doji was known principally for her beauty, her grace, and her incredible powers of persuasion. She was a consummate negotiator and a lover of art, but unlike most of the other kami, her early history seems to have been left blank by the creators of Legend of the Five Rings. We know that after the kami landed on Sepun Hill, Doji spent the next 5 years, like the rest of her siblings, exploring their newfound home. We know that she was an enthusiastic supporter of Hante's decision that the kami should rule over humanity, and that she participated in the tournament to decide which among them would lead. We know that she made it to the semi-final round only to lose out to her brother Akoto, and that after Hante became the first emperor, he decided to gift her, and by extension the clan she would later found, all of the territory along the eastern coast of the newly made Emerald Empire. To this day, nearly the entire coastal plain of Rokugan belongs to the Crane clan, stretching all the way from the Phoenix clan in the northeast, all the way down to the lands of the Crab clan in the south. With extensive and fertile rice fields and a near monopoly on maritime trade, it's very easy to see that Doji and her descendants really lucked out in terms of prime real estate. It's also easy to see that the immense wealth and prosperity that resulted from all these advantages have helped make the Crane clan the wealthiest and most glamorous of all the great clans, much to the annoyance of their many rivals. But as I said, Doji doesn't really do much in these early years of the empire. But nothing happens that really concerns her until the 23rd year following the fall of the kami to Earth. In that year, the Emperor Hante decided to hold a tournament to decide who was the greatest swordsman in the land and who would be his personal protector. This is traditionally considered the first tournament of the Emerald Champion, even though the office itself would not be officially ratified until the year 153, long after Hante's death. Either way, the greatest swordsmen and the greatest swordswomen in all the land came to participate in the tournament, and among these was a handsome 19-year-old named Kakita. Born in year 4 of the empire, along with his twin sister Kiyomori to a small-time tribal chieftain, Kakita had grown up hearing stories of the mighty gods that had fallen from the heavens to bring enlightened rule to Rokugan. One fateful day when Kakita was 15, he had just finished hunting down a rogue troll that had been causing problems for his tribe when a strange old man walked out of the forest to meet him and offered to teach the boy how to be a great warrior. Simply calling himself grandfather, the old man offered to teach the boy on one condition. Grandfather predicted that one day the kami would have need of Kakita. The condition was that when the call came, Kakita was to answer it without hesitation. Kakita agreed to the promise, and so the old man taught him swordsmanship. We're not told how long this training lasted, but given that this was only 4 years before the first Emerald tournament, we have to assume that Kakita was an incredibly fast learner. When his training was complete, the old man sent him into the mountains, and there he found an old woman working a forge. Calling herself grandmother, the old woman explained that as grandfather had taught Kakita how to use a sword, she was to teach him how to make a sword. Once again, we're given no exact time frame and have to assume that Kakita was insanely talented, as both of these skills normally take decades to master. But the long and short of it was that when it was over, Kakita had forged a beautiful new sword with his own hands. A slightly curved, single-edged blade, strong enough to weather intense blows and sharp enough to cut through almost anything. Thus, in the history of Rokugan, Kakita is credited with the invention of the katana, that most famous and legendary of blades. The instant his training was completed, Grandmother revealed her true form as a Kenku, essentially a crow man, and one of the original races to inhabit Rokugan before the coming of humanity. The Kenku are renowned as expert swordsmen and wise teachers, and this particular Kenku had foreseen a great destiny for Kakita, and so it had assumed the guises of grandfather and grandmother to give the young man the skills he would need to fulfill that destiny. It is considered a sign of great fortune to receive personal instruction from a Kenku, and only the greatest swordmasters in all of Rokugan have been so blessed. Many such men and women have existed, but Kakita remains the first and arguably one of the greatest. And so, in the year 23, there was Kakita at the first Emerald Tournament, ready to demonstrate his skill and prove his worth. Alas, there are no details as to how the Emerald Tournament went, so we can only assume that Kakita blazed his way through the competition like a stereotypical anime protagonist. To his credit, Kakita was a courteous man and always bowed respectfully to his opponent after defeating him, honoring his effort. Another fighter blitzing her way to the final round was a warrior woman named Matsu. Unlike Kakita, she was very disrespectful to her opponents and always humiliated them when she won. The two faced off in the final round, and Kakita was ultimately victorious. But unlike all the other opponents he'd faced, when he bested Matsu, Kakita did not bow to her. The enraged Matsu demanded why Kakita did not show her the same respect he had given to all his other opponents, and the swordsman responded coolly that she had shown no respect to her enemies and so deserved none. Much like a modern Twitter activist, Matsu interpreted this legitimate criticism as a personal insult and vowed eternal enmity between her and Kakita. However, that grudge wouldn't become relevant until much later, so stick a pin in that for now. At any rate, Kakita became the first Emerald Champion, a position that for generations would be earned by many superlative swordsmen, most of them from the Crane clan. Of course, the Lady Doji had been among those watching the tournament, and Kakita was struck by her grace and beauty. Emperor Hante noticed this, and so, after the tournament, he suggested that Doji and Kakita ought to get married. Kakita was young, strong, but also wise and courteous, everything an ideal husband should be. Doji was willing, but only on the condition that Kakita succeeded in 3 challenges of her own devising. If Kakita wanted her hand, he would have to prove himself. Well, that is, more so than he already had. The challenges were, first, to bring the dead back to life, second, to measure the width of the world, and the third, to show Doji herself a vision of absolute beauty. If Doji's true intention was to scare Kakita off from marrying her, she was certainly doing a good job of it. Kakita despaired of even accomplishing one of the tasks, let alone all 3. But as he wandered the Crane lands and pondered just what he was going to do, fate intervened in the form of a wise old fisherwoman named Yasuki. She spoke with Kakita, and after the swordsman told her all about Doji's challenges, she took pity on the young man and gave him some advice on where he might find the answers. At last, Kakita returned to Otosan Uchi to present his answers to the Lady Doji. First, he presented her a biwa, a traditional Japanese lute he'd made from a piece of driftwood, figuratively bringing life to something that was dead. Second, in answering the question of how wide is the world, he explained that the world is only as wide and the journey only as long as the company you have on that journey. For example, he said, if my companion were the Lady Sun, Amaterasu, it would only take a single day to cross the entire width of the world. Third and finally, Kakita presented Doji with a mirror, and when she looked into it, the former goddess saw her own beautiful face staring back at her, a vision of absolute beauty. And so, Doji and Kakita were married. In gratitude for her advice, and with the permission of his new wife, Kakita gave to the old woman Yasuki the right to create and found her own samurai family, the Yasuki family. He even brought Yasuki into the family by marrying his sister Kiyomori to Yasuki's own son Torikago. The next 10 years were a period of peace and happiness for the Crane clan and its new ruling families. When he wasn't spending time with his family or acting as the emperor's personal bodyguard, Kakita spent his days honing his swordsmanship skills and developing his own style of fighting. Kakita believed that the ideal form of combat was in striking down your enemy in a single perfect cut. And so he developed the style that would become known as Kakita Iai Jutsu. Iai Jutsu is in fact a real-world technique and is essentially the samurai equivalent of a quick draw. The idea is that you draw your sword and cut down the enemy in the same motion. Obviously, using such a technique requires incredible precision and blinding speed, and is therefore a very difficult skill to master. This became the basis of Kakita's style of swordsmanship, and many hailed him as the greatest swordsman that ever lived. This inevitably created a rivalry between Kakita and another great swordsman of the age, Mirumoto of the Dragon Clan. Meanwhile, Doji spent much of her time serving as Emperor Hantei's advisor. More than any of the other kami, she also contributed the most to creating the culture and society of the Emerald Empire. She is credited with inventing the concepts of commerce and economics, as well as Rokugan's class system and the Imperial Court. Under Doji's class system, the people of Rokugan are divided into 3 classes. Well, technically there are 4, but officially there are only 3. They are the samurai class, those who fight, the clergy, those who pray, this class being comprised of monks and shugenja, because after all, shugenja use magic by praying to the spirits, and the bonge, or those who work. Basically, everyone else roughly divided into the 3 subclasses of merchants, artisans, and farmers. But as I said, there is technically a 4th class, the hinin, or non-people, which kind of explains why officially there are only 3 classes of people in Rokugan. Such non-persons include criminals, entertainers, charlatans, gamblers, geishas, ninjas, and the eta, or untouchables. Once again, a brief detour into history and culture. The eta was a real thing, especially back in the days of feudal Japan. And as in The Legend of the Five Rings, they were socially considered to be the lowest of the low. Japanese culture places a great emphasis on cleanliness and purity, and essentially the eta were comprised of all the different professions that involved filth, blood, and death. For example, tanners, because back in the day people used urine to turn hides into leather goods, butchers, grave diggers, undertakers, torturers, and people who cleaned up manure. Of course, in 1871, the Japanese government formally abolished the class system, but even today there is a certain degree of discrimination often leveled against people who are known to be descended from eta families. Essentially, the hinin class of Rokugan were the lowest of the low. Even peasants could abuse or even kill a hinin with almost no legal repercussions. On a somewhat more palatable note, there is arguably Doji's greatest creation, the Imperial Court. The purpose of the Imperial Court, at least according to Doji, was to be an arena where people could come and practice what she called the art of civilization. Here, the imperial household, along with representatives of the 7 great clans, the various minor clans, and their constituent families, could come together and conduct business, arranging marriages, negotiating alliances, that sort of thing. Of course, Doji knew that there would still be conflict in the political arena. There would be rivalries and factions, families would rise and fall. But at least this way, no blood was shed and no one got killed. Hopefully. There would be the odd stabbing or poisoning over the centuries, but for the most part the Imperial Court did its job, and many a dispute that might have otherwise ended in armed conflict was instead resolved with words rather than swords. For this, Doji, and by extension the entire Crane clan, would be known throughout the empire as the left hand of the emperors of Rokugan. Naturally, since it was their own divine founder that had created the Imperial Court, along with all the intricate rules and etiquette that members of said court were to abide by, The Crane clan usually came out on top in this arena of jade and silk, much to the frustration of the other clans, and especially their great rival, the Lion Clan. So yeah, in complete contrast to the last episode on the Phoenix Clan, the early history of the Crane was pretty smooth and uneventful. Apart from the Emerald Tournament and Doji's 3 challenges, there was none of the tension or friction between the families of the Crane clan that so marked the early history of the Phoenix. With Doji married to Kakita and Kakita's sister married to the son of Yasuki, everyone was essentially one big family, a family that got even bigger when Doji and Kakita started having children. First, a son named Yasurugi and his twin sister Konishiko, and then 3 sons in succession, Nio, Shimizu, and Hayaku. And all 5 would go on to marry and have children of their own. We'll come back to the 3 younger sons later, as their relevance is later on in the story. For now, let's give some focus to the first 2, Yasurugi and Konishiko, as they would play a vital role in events soon to come. In the case of Yasurugi, the eldest son of Doji and Kakita, his primary claim to fame was that he was a master swordsmith. Sources differ on who taught him his profession. Some claim that it was Kayu, the master craftsman who later became a leading figure of the Crab Clan. Still others that he was taught by a Kenku named Kozue, just as his father had been taught by one. Yasurugi married and had 1 son, though the names of his wife and child are not known, and in the course of his tragically short life, he crafted 5 katana of peerless workmanship. The first, Kunshu, or Monarch, was presented to Emperor Hante, and soon became the ancestral sword of the Imperial dynasty. The second, Shukujo, or Lady, became the ancestral sword of the Crane clan. Naishi, the one sword for which I could not find a good translation of its name, was supposedly given to the Kenku Kozue, as thanks for training Yasurugi. The last 2, Chukandomo, meaning middle child as it was the 3rd sword Yasurugi made, and Kanpeki, perfect, were locked away after Yasurugi's death by order of his younger brother Nio, who decreed that the swords should not be taken out again until Yasurugi's infant son was old enough to decide their fate. As for Konishiko, his twin sister, she had 1 daughter, and her great contribution to the empire was the creation of Cha no Yu, the tea ceremony, an activity in which tea is ceremonially prepared and served by a host to his or her guests. Tea ceremonies are in fact a real thing in Japan. Such events can last many hours and often involve highly elaborate rituals. There are even schools today whose whole curriculum is teaching its students the proper way to perform a tea ceremony. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. Apparently, Konishiko did not entirely approve of her mother dividing all of Rokugan into 4 rigid classes, and she created Cha no Yu as a way to, if only for a time, suspend social distinctions and allow the rich and the poor, the noble and the common, to come together. As such, unlike many real-world tea ceremonies, Konishiko's was simple and relatively short, only 2 hours long, so that anyone, even poor peasants, could perform it. Now, despite everything that I've just said, Doji wasn't really an elitist, and it's not as if she had any concern or thought for the common people of Rokugan. In fact, apart from her marriage to Kakita, the only eventful moment of her life prior to the war with Fu Leng was how she learned a very important lesson from a common man. One snowy day in the winter, Doji looked out of a window of the Imperial Palace and saw a beggar shivering in the cold. She took pity on him and sent some guards to bring the man into the warmth, but the man refused. When Doji herself went outside to ask the beggar why he wouldn't come in from the cold, the beggar asked her if she had ever taken the time to look at the snow and appreciate how each snowflake was different from the others. As she sat beside the beggar and watched the snow fall around them, Doji came to the realization that everything, even gods like the kami, will eventually fade and be forgotten. She and her descendants would take this lesson to heart, and for that reason, the crest of the Doji family is that of a crane holding a snowflake in its beak. Of course, the good times finally came to an end in the year 33, when the 9th kami, Fu Leng, who had landed in hell instead of on the earth, reappeared and declared war on all of Rokugan. Like everyone else, the samurai of the Crane clan fought the vicious hordes of the Shadowlands to a standstill, but the forces of the Empire never managed to gain a decisive victory. Then, 9 years into the war, the sage Shinsei came looking for 7 heroes, one from each clan, to join him in a final do-or-die attack on Fu Lang. Originally, Doji Yasurugi, eldest son of Doji and Kakita, was chosen to be the Crane Thunder. But the day after Shinsei made his pronouncement, Yasurugi was killed by an Oni that had somehow slipped into the family castle. You might think that this was Fu Lang sending an assassin in anticipation of Shinsei's plan, but there's no evidence of any attempts on the lives of the other Thunders, so I can only assume that this demon just happened to be by and did it for the lulz. Then Konishiko stepped forward. As Yasurugi's twin, she shared his soul, and so could take his place. Matsu, the same woman that her father had defeated at the Emerald Tournament and was now Thunder of the Lion Clan, initially dismissed her, but then Konishiko disarmed the Lion Clan warrior, proving that she was very much her father's daughter. Having lost one child, Kakita and Doji were understandably reluctant to let their daughter go. In order to try and reassure them, Mirumoto, Kakita's old rival and now Dragon Thunder, promised him that he would do everything in his power to protect Konishiko, asking only that Kakita protect the Empire in return. And so Konishiko took up Shukujo, the sword her brother had forged, and made the journey to the Shadowlands with the other Thunders and Shinsei. On the journey, she managed to strike up a friendship with Mirumoto, and the Dragon Thunder is said to have taught her some of his own skills and techniques. Alas, what skills she had and what techniques Mirumoto taught her failed to save Konishiko's life on the Day of Thunder. In fact, she was the very first to die, fending off a horde of living obsidian statues so that the others could take on Fu Lang. Legend has it that the spirit of her twin brother Yasurugi fought alongside her that fateful day, but even his help could not avail her. Konishiko perished, and the sword Shukujo was lost along with her. Her loss, right on the heels of her brother's death, devastated both of her parents. Kakita's only way of coping with the loss was by becoming ever more obsessed with perfecting his swordsmanship, while Doji sought solace in her remaining children. Her eldest surviving son, Doji Neo, was very much a man in his mother's mold. He was a graceful and dignified man who wrote multiple treatises on court life and diplomacy, as well as working with the Yasuki family to establish the Crane clan's extensive trade network, which would ultimately make the Crane the wealthiest of all the great clans of Rokugan. After the Day of Thunder, Neo also wrote an extensive treatise on the tea ceremony his sister had invented to honor her memory. He then went on to create his own more elaborate version of Cha no Yu and demonstrated it to the court of Emperor Genji. This version, far more elaborate and lasting over 4 hours and compared to the original 2, would become the official tea ceremony of the Imperial Court, which kind of defeats the purpose for which Konishiko had created the tea ceremony to begin with, actually. But where Neo took after his mother, his younger brother Shimizu very much favored his father. Not only did he devote himself to the sword with the same amount of vigor as Kakita, but Shimizu also chose to change his family name, establishing the Kakita family. The story of the youngest son, Hayaku, is a bit more dramatic. At some point after the Day of Thunder, Lady Doji had a dream where she thought her daughter was still alive. Hearing of this, Hayaku immediately went off into the Shadowlands to bring her back. 3 years passed, and when Hayaku finally returned, he was a changed man. His face had grown aged and lined beyond his years, and his hair had gone snow white. He could no longer speak due to a long scar cutting across his own throat. He had not brought back Konishiko, but he did manage to recover Shukujo, the sword that Yasurugi had made and which Konishiko had used in the fight against Fu Lang. He also brought with him a young female ronin named Hidayoko. She had originally belonged to the Crab clan, but had been expelled after using forbidden magic. The two married, and in honor of Hayaku's sacrifice, he was allowed to create his own family, the Dai-Doji, or Defenders of Doji. To this day, many members of the Crane clan dye their hair white in remembrance of Hayaku's sacrifice, and it has become their most recognizable trait. With the war with Fu Lang over, life in Rokugan became a little slower, if not less eventful. After burying his eldest son Yasurugi under a shrine, Kakita received a dream of his son telling him that there was an ore of metal right underneath the shrine that he had infused with his spirit. As soon as this was verified, the shrine and the remains were removed and placed elsewhere, and instead, the famous steel crane forge was built on the spot. To this day, it is believed that the iron ore mined from beneath the forge is infused with the purity of Yasurugi's spirit, and certainly it is true that the famous Kakita blades made from said iron are said to be the best in all the empire. Regardless, Kakita continued to serve as Emerald Champion, to Hante and, after he died, to his successor, Emperor Genji. Eventually, Genji got tired of the constant arguments over whether the Kakita style or the Mirumoto style was the best, and so he ordered Kakita and Mirumoto's successor, Mirumoto Hojatsu, to have a duel and settle the matter once and for all. Legend has it that the two sword masters faced one another and stood completely still for a full day and a night, neither man reaching for his sword. At the end, they both bowed and walked away. When everybody else asked just what had happened, both swordmasters agreed that if either one had drawn his weapon, both men would have died. And so, the argument over which style was superior remained at a draw. But I guess the people who wrote the histories of Legend of the Five Rings decided that this was a bit too anticlimactic. And so, in the year 46, some unrelated conflict between the Dragon and Crane clans boiled over into open conflict, and Mirumoto Hojatsu and Kakita wound up facing off against one another across a battlefield. As the two men predicted, both drew their swords, and both men died. Hojatsu was killed instantly, while Kakita lasted long enough to ask his son, Shimizu, to bring him Hojatsu's sword, whereupon Kakita ended his suffering by falling upon his rival's blade. A monument was erected on the spot in honor of the two swordmasters, and Kakita Shimizu would follow in his father's footsteps by winning the second Emerald tournament and becoming the second Emerald champion. Kakita's death devastated Doji, and despite the fact that she had 3 living children, and later on many grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, the only people who seemed able to comfort her were her siblings. She would travel and visit each one in turn, but alas, these trips grew shorter and shorter as, over time, each of her siblings either died or disappeared. Shiba had died at the end of the war with Fu Lang, sacrificing himself to save Shinsei and the remaining Thunder Shosuro. Emperor Hante was poisoned and died a few years later in 45. Shinjo, Doji's sister and the one she had always been closest to, left the empire with the Kirin clan that same year. Mayushi disappeared in 83, Akodo died in 99, and Togashi was pronounced dead in 101. The only sibling to ever outlive Doji was Hida, and the two had never been very close. So Doji essentially stopped her travels after Togashi's death. Finally, in the year 102, Doji's loneliness became too much for her to bear. Before departing from the mortal world forever, Doji did 2 things. First, she went to Doji Ochiba, the wife of her son Doji Neo, and whispered certain secrets into her ear. No one knows exactly what those secrets are, but it is said that ever since, these secrets have been passed from the wife of one Crane Clan champion to the next over generations. The second thing Doji did was use the last of her divine power to conjure a magic suit of armor as a gift for one of her great-grandsons, Doji Sasageru. Then, after standing a while beside a massive rock on the coastline and watching the sun set behind the sea, the Lady Doji, divine founder of the Crane Clan, walked into the waves and was never seen again. The magic armor would be named Sasageru after its first owner, and it would become the ancestral armor of the Crane Clan, handed down from one clan champion to the next. Meanwhile, the rocks that Doji had stood beside before walking into the sea became a pilgrimage site, known as Lady's Rest. And every year during the Chrysanthemum Festival, maidens from all the clans of Rokugan come to lay garlands of flowers upon it, in the belief that doing so will make them lucky in love. But the story of the Crane Clan's founding doesn't end with the death of Doji. 2 more important changes were needed to shape the Crane Clan into what they are now. The first of these was the Crane Crab War, the first quote-unquote actual war fought within the Empire after the war with Fu Lang. There's enough detail on the Crane Crab War to earn its own video at some distant future date, but the long and short of it was that the Yasuki family felt they weren't getting a fair shake from the rest of the clan, decided to defect to the Crab clan, the Crane got pissy and started a war over it, the Emperor at the time basically had to threaten, "Don't you make me come down there," and the two sides finally made peace. The Crane clan ultimately came off worse, as the Yasuki family did indeed join the Crab clan, taking with them a modest-sized chunk of Crane territory. They would still be pretty salty about it 1,000 years later. Before I cover the second major change, I want to briefly dwell for a while on the then 3 primary families of the Crane clan: the Doji, the Kakita, and the Dai Doji. With the other great clans, generally speaking, each of the primary families that comprise the clans have a specific role, a role that is almost exclusive to that family. For example, in the Lion clan, the Matsu family are the warriors and berserkers, the Akodo are generals and strategists, the Ikoma are the historians, and the Kitsu are the dedicated Shugenja family. This is not the case with the Crane clan. This may be because these 3 families come from the same lineage, the 3 younger sons of Doji and Kakita. But, uniquely among the great clans, there is a great degree of overlap and lack of specialization among the Doji, Kakita, and Dai Doji families. Each is most famous for a particular kind of skill set, but it's far less pronounced than it is with the other families, meaning that your average Crane samurai has a very well-rounded skill set. For example, the Doji family are trained in the arts of war, which is hardly surprising. They are a samurai family, as well as the leading family of the Crane clan, but they are mostly known for being courtiers and politicians, able to move with ease amidst the ever-shifting tides of court politics. The Kakita are also well trained in the arts of politics and court etiquette, but they are mostly known as swordsmiths and duelists, as the inheritors of Kakita's style of swordsmanship. As for the Dai Doji, they know their way around both an argument and a dueling circle, but as the self-appointed protectors of the Crane clan, their reputation is hard and pragmatic. They are often more soldiers than duelists. The whole point of this tangent is that, for most of their early history, the Crane clan did not have a family of specialists, and more importantly, they didn't have a dedicated Shugenja family. All of the great clans have at least one Shugenja family, and some, like the Scorpion and Phoenix clans, have 2. That all changed in the year 397, when the Crane intervened to stop a war between the Lion and Phoenix clans. Being big fans of pacifism, most of the Phoenix clan was more than happy to settle the matter with words rather than with swords. All except one, and his name was Isawa Asahina, the elemental master of air. Asahina was both a Shugenja of great power over the spirits of the air, and a man of intense rage. His brother had been killed by the Lion clan during the war, and initially the full force of his fury was turned against them. But when the Crane intervened to stop the war, Asahina's fury turned against them for meddling in the war and denying him his chance at revenge. Utterly blinded by his rage, Asahina went on a one-man rampage through Crane lands, destroying everything in his path. No one could stand before him and his potent magic. No one except one, the daughter of the Crane clan champion at the time, Doji Kiriko. She confronted Asahina when he was blasting his way through a small village, but to the surprise of the cowering peasants, Kiriko refused to raise arms against him. Time and again, Asahina inflicted grievous wounds upon her unresisting body, both with his magic and with his sword. It was only when Kiriko was balancing on the brink of death itself that Asahina finally awoke from his rage, and he realized what he had done. And so Asahina's rampage came to an end in what became known as the Victory with No Strike. Kiriko had not only saved the villagers from Asahina's fury, she had also saved the Shugenja from himself, from being consumed by his own emotions. Filled with admiration for the samurai maiden and ashamed at his own actions, Asahina renounced all ties to the Phoenix clan and the Asawa family, as well as violence altogether. Instead, he offered his services to the Crane clan, nursed Kiriko back to health with his own hands, and offered to teach wind magic to anyone willing to learn. Under his ministrations, Kiriko eventually recovered and became one of Asahina's students. Eventually, the warrior maiden and the Shugenja fell in love and got married. And years later, when Asahina was old and soon to die, the Crane clan decided to recognize his service to them by allowing him and his successors to create their own great family within the clan, the Asahina family. In this way did the Crane clan acquire a family of specialist magic users. As left hand of the Emperor, his most trusted advisors in affairs of art and diplomacy, the Crane clan enjoys a position of significant prominence among the other great clans of Rokugan. What's more, ever since Hantei I married Miyoko, a woman who was vassal to Doji and Kakita, the Crane clan have done their best to contrive it so that almost every Hantei emperor took to wife a woman of the Crane clan, which of course gave them an even greater advantage in the Imperial Court, much to the annoyance of the others. Speaking of the others, let's end the video with how the Crane view the other great clans and how they relate to them. The other 6 great clans can be roughly divided into 3 groups. For the most part, the Crane get along just fine with the Phoenix, Dragon, and Unicorn clans, and usually get along very poorly with the Scorpion, Crab, and Lion clans. The Phoenix are possibly the Crane's closest allies. Thanks to their pacifism, they are just as eager to avoid unnecessary war as the Crane. But the Phoenix spend too much time studying magic and not enough time studying politics and economics, so they're not as reliable an ally as they could be. As for the Dragon clan, chasing enlightenment is all well and fine, but as far as the Crane are concerned, the Dragon really ought to spend a little less time with their heads in the clouds and a little more time contributing to the Empire. The relationship between the Crane and the Unicorn clans is mostly friendly, but the Unicorn had been gone so long from the Empire and adopted all sorts of strange, barbaric customs. Being the foremost experts of culture in Rokugan, the Crane clan are of course all too willing to teach the Unicorn the ways of their old homeland, but while some are open to the idea, many are also reluctant to give up their own traditions, no matter how foreign and unseemly they may be. On the opposite end of the scale, the Crane regard the Crab clan as a bunch of brutes, useful at fending off the monsters of the Shadowlands, but they're so uncivilized and have forgotten just about everything except how to fight. The fact that the Yasuki family defected to them is also something of a sticking point for the Crane. The Crane do respect the Crab, but less as equals and more the kind of respect one has for an especially savage guard dog. Of course, the Crane have no love for the Scorpion clan, no one does, but where the other clans are quick to dismiss the Scorpion as a bunch of dishonorable, cowardly backstabbers, the Crane are perhaps the only great clan that recognizes just how dangerous the Scorpion can be. Like the Crane, the Scorpion are pretty savvy political operators, and they can be just as deadly with words and innuendos as with poison and hidden blades. But of course the ones the Crane have the worst relations with are the Lion clan. Part of it is professional rivalry. As the Crane are the Emperor's left hand, his chief advisors in diplomacy and art, the Lion clan are the Emperor's right hand, his generals and strategists, essentially making the Lion and the Crane the 2 greatest clans in all of Rokugan. But there's also a personal element to it as well. Remember all the way back at the beginning of the video when Kakita defeated Matsu and told her that she didn't deserve any respect because she was an asshole? Well, Matsu joined the Lion clan, just as Kakita joined the Crane clan, and her descendants are very good at nursing grudges. In year 50 of the Empire, the Matsu family managed to persuade Emperor Genji that Kakita's words to Matsu at the Emerald Tournament was a stain upon their family honor that needed to be redressed. Genji eventually gave his imperial consent, and the Matsu army stormed into Crane lands, burning and destroying several towns and villages for no other reason than to avenge the insult to their family and to prove that the Crane clan and the Kakita family in general were in no ways better than they were. The Lion-Crane feud has lasted over 1,000 years, and there are many, many reasons why the 2 clans dislike each other so much, but the mutual enmity between the Matsu and Kakita families is by far the oldest. Not that there haven't been attempts over the years by both sides to try and make peace. One time, the Crane decided to give Chukan Domo, one of the swords forged by Doji Yasurugi as a peace offering to the Lion Clan. Unfortunately, both the sword and the person entrusted with delivering it were lost at sea. The Crane clan believed that being a samurai is more than just being a fighter. He should be as comfortable wielding a calligraphy brush as he is a sword. Any man can destroy, but only a civilized man can both destroy and create. Any brute can appreciate strength, but only a cultured warrior can appreciate strength and beauty. A samurai should be passionate as well as honorable, cultured as well as loyal, and intelligent as well as dutiful. Art and war are the two halves of the same coin, the two halves of civilization. And in all the Emerald Empire, there is no great clan more dedicated to both than the Crane.